I took 2 minutes after, and it's possible that some people will still join us, but I think we're going to go ahead and get started, and they can just join as we go. Again, you should be able to see my screen. So today we're going to have a walkthrough of SMMware's features, and anytime during the presentation, you can feel free to answer or ask questions in the chat. I keep my eye on that, and we'll answer them as I see them. Before we get started, I'm curious to know if people have a very specific thing that they're looking to get out of today's presentation, certain features that you're looking for, problems that you're having within running your business that you're hoping that SMMware can help you with, things like that. And I'll keep an eye on the chat for anything along those lines. But meanwhile, today's tour is going to be divided up into 4 general sections. Okay, Brianna, thanks for that, the invoices and estimates area. And we're actually going to be starting in the sales process, and we will eventually touch on invoices as well. This is our 4 tracks. In the blue, we've got kind of the basic track where we're talking about clients and sales leads and creating jobs and invoices. The second track is in green, talking about the organizations and contacts, which is our resource center where you can store information about vendors and other people that you maybe are not hiring directly as you would a vendor, but want to keep track of, like people who refer business to you. Okay, thank you everyone for your comments regarding what you're looking for. If anybody has any more to add, feel free. There's no time limit on that. The third section, we're going to talk about the calendars, tasks, notes, and calls. And then the fourth section, we're talking about integrations. All right, so now you should be looking at the home page for SMMware. And I just thought I'd show myself just so you can see who I am. There's an actual person here. AI is not running this presentation today. All right, so we're on the home page, and we're going to start by looking at sales. This is our listing of ongoing sales leads. And I'd like to mention that SMMware has 3 fundamental records that you'll want to understand. We have a client record, which is about them as a person. It contains information that does not change when they move from place to place. So it'll have email and phone, their name, of course, but it's not going to talk about the elevator code at that location or something like that. Next, we have the sales lead, which is what we're looking at now. I'm starting a new sales lead. If this was an existing client, I would pick them from this list, but I'm going to assume that this is a brand new possible client that you've never spoken to before. Here in the lower right, you can see where we have not just 1 field for who referred the business to you, but 3. There's supposed to be the category at the top is supposed to be, say, web search or seminar, something high level, because we have a report for who refers business to you that lets you filter and answer questions like, where did our business come from in the 3rd quarter of last year? This much from real estate, this much from senior living centers, so on and so forth. Here we also have a place where you can indicate a client representative and their relationship. So let's say that you're working with an estate situation and you're working with an attorney. They might already be in the system and you can pick them from the list. If it's the adult child in the family, then maybe they wouldn't be on the list. You can add them new from here. And then you can indicate, well, this is the attorney or adult child and so on. Here we have some client custom fields. And this could be something like if they use a cane or they're in a wheelchair, pet information. These labels are something that you can set yourself. And these values are just what I chose for this demo, but you're not locked into them. Down below, we have a place where you can put in addresses. And if you have locations that you work with on a regular basis, probably senior living centers, then you can type in the name of the location and it will fill in the address for you. So you don't have to copy and paste or memorize these addresses. So I'm finishing up with the client record, and I'm going back to the sales lead. So we've touched on two of these three records. We've touched on clients and sales leads. And if you win the sales lead, you create a job, which is our third main record type. And I would also distinguish between a quote, which is the document that you give to your client that has the work that's to be done, when it's going to be done, and how much you're going to charge, versus the sales lead, which is a place that you can store information other than the quote. So if you take photos during the process, you can indicate that, or you can upload those to the sales lead. So this is information that is, again, separate from the quote. Here you can indicate the type of work to be done, and this list is customizable. This list of possible sales lead statuses, it is also customizable. You can indicate who, if you have more than one person doing sales, you can pick them here so you know who's doing this one. We also have some custom fields, 28 of them as a matter of fact, which are, in this case, they are about the location, elevator code, which day the garbage comes, who's doing the moving in this particular case is one option. You can also assign organizations to this sales lead. You can indicate, here's who the real estate company is, here's who the moving company is, so on and so forth. And we can also indicate where they are moving to. So we have this address down here. SMMware formally keeps track of address histories. Here's where they were when you met them. And then each time you move them, it's kind of like the layers in a cake, where the bottom layer is their original address, and then you put on more layers as you move them. This is the status board, and that'll be used on the homepage as a way of getting the 30,000-foot view of how you're doing. And so we have a chance to assign a tag and to write some status notes. So I'm going to go ahead and save this now. And here's where I can create quotes. Creating a quote within SMMware is a question of mixing and matching the various blocks that we provide you. So we have header blocks, which is large, bold text, just to visually divide up the quote. We've got group blocks and text blocks. A labor block is where you start putting in time and rates. After you've worked with the system for a while, you're going to create some templates and just use those. I'm going to pick one of those templates to get us going. Here's a client block, pulls in the information about the client. This is a header block with the large, bold text. This is a group block with line items in it. Anything that is in gray is either going to be pulled from somewhere else or calculated for you. So when I change the hours, it's going to recalculate this figure. You don't get to, or you don't have to put in the subtotal there. You don't want to do those hand calculations yourself. That's what computers are for. But all these other places, you can go ahead and start typing in as needed. And this is one particular example of how I chose to combine these blocks to make this quote. But in your case, you will combine these blocks however you like and what works for you. Some of the other block types, we just have a text block here. This is a summary block. And then below that, we have the legal block. And this is also tied to the e-signing functionality. I'm going to go ahead and save this. For e-signing, you have to tell the system the name and how you're going to, of the person signing and how you're going to contact them. So this is where you'd put in their name. This is where you can put in an email address. This is a shortcut. So since we're creating a template, it'd be nice if SMMware, if you just put in client and then SMMware pulls in the name of the client. And if you want to contact them via email, you can have that here, and SMMware will go out and fetch that client's email to put it in place. So that's exactly what these shortcuts do. I'm going to show you the PDF that SMMware can generate. You would have your own header image. This is not what your clients would see, but you can see the rest of the quote, the formatting, and so on. So that PDF is something that you can email to the client, and it will start by guessing that you want to send it to the email address in the client's profile. But I can add more email addresses by separating them with semicolons, and I can add CC email addresses. This subject line is pulled from the settings editor as a default, but I can customize it in this particular case. The same situation with the body of the email. And if I was going to start e-signing, I just click on this button to kick off that process once it's ready to go. Moving on, the next thing that we can talk about is when the client says that they've got their quote from you, but they would like some changes, and they have to make another version. So we're creating quote version number 2 right here. This particular field is marked as being private. The clients are not going to see this note, and you can write a reminder to yourself. This way, 3 months down the line, when you look back, you see that there's 3 or 4 different versions of the quotes, you can trace through it and figure out why each one was created. Also, SMMware has 2 different ways that you can charge clients. One approach uses a per job rate. It's one rate for every hour across the entire job, and that's the simplest approach. If you have a more fancier approach to charging clients, like if you charge different rates for different kinds of work, maybe floor planning is more expensive hourly rates than packing, or the owner's time is worth more than someone who was recently hired. That is called job codes. A job code is a label and a rate. And you will, when you go to enter your hours, you will pick from the list of the labels, and then behind the scenes, SMMware knows what rate to use. We're going to talk about those a little bit more shortly. All right, so I've created version 2. Whereas before we had a new quote button, now we also have quote 1 and quote 2 here. And SMMware has pulled the hours and the amount from the quote and filled out that line here. I'd like to touch on some automations that SMMware provides. When the customer tells you that they're going to make a decision on a certain date, and you enter that into here, SMMware will create a task. The due date of that task will match your customer's decision date. That way, if they have not contacted you, the notification from SMMware is essentially going to tap you on the shoulder and tell you it's time to pick up the phone and see what's going on with them. We also have a similar automation when we mark a sales lead as being submitted to the client. That means that you've given them a quote and you're waiting to hear back from them. Then this date gets filled out. And then in the settings editor, you tell SMMware how far into the future to go to send you your reminders. Once again, it's creating a task, and you'll get your notifications. All right, so here we are back on the sales lead, making sure that we address everything before we leave. Here is where you can upload files. Notice how these files have the long, cryptic, random file names. I'm going to multi-select those. I can assign a tag to them. The thinking is that you would say, all right, these are all from bedroom 1. You go into a home, you take the photos of bedroom 1, you upload them, then you go into bedroom 2, and you tag them as you go. Here we have the auto rename function. What that does for us is gets rid of those long cryptic file names and gives you something that you can refer to during a phone call. So here it is, bedroom 1001, bedroom 1002. So if you're on the phone, it's a lot easier to talk about it that way than saying, well, this is the one at the in the master bedroom, and it's got the couch on the left, or this easy chair on the left. So here we are looking at the photos, and we can click through them in the gallery. Now we can rotate them, change the tags, change the names. We can write a note. So Janelle, you're talking about for the front desk. So Brianna, when you ask about the front desk, does that mean that you have an office manager that you're looking to see what they would get? Maybe if I could let me know a little bit clearer what you're looking for, I'd be happy to answer that. I'm going to go ahead and back to this note. That you can write. And for Janelle, and when it comes to, you want to rename some of the rooms for the files. I'm not clear on what you're looking to do there. You can customize the tags. If you go into the settings editor, this is also a customizable list. So this is the list of tags that are in the system right now, but that can be modified. And for Brianna, assuming that you are talking about an office manager, I think we can touch on which things they can see. Maybe we'll start with talking about that when we look at associate profiles. I mentioned before that if you are charging different rates for different kinds of work, that you can use job codes. And in the settings editor, you would provide the default rates, but on a case-by-case basis, you can change those rates for each and every job code. That way, if there is a reason to increase the charges, maybe there's a difficult situation, or if you feel like you need to lower the rates in order to win the work, you can customize those rates right there. And every different sales lead and job can have their own values. For Janelle, yes, you absolutely can modify those image tags from the settings editor. Sometimes people also add category, like an image tag, like before and after, things like that. So hopefully that has answered your question. And then Brianna will be addressing yours as we go. So permissions wise, when you're looking at a given associate, you can make them, you can give them sales lead permissions or not. So your front office person will have access to the sales leads or not at your discretion. Then we'll go back to look at the list of sales leads again. We have a sales report function here. It tells you for all the different categories you have, how many quotes you have going on, and their values, their hours. We have that same information based on percentages. This gray bar is a filter, and the results down below reflect the settings in that filter. That way, and that includes the sales reporting. You can export this as well. So we can answer questions, how many, we can focus in on specific status levels to say how many we have in progress. We can use date ranges. We can look at a given client. We can also, if you have more than one salesperson, you can filter it against the salesperson and see how busy different people are. From here, I'm going to go look at the jobs. Once again, we have a filter at the top and a listing down below. And the thing I think you would take away from here is that a job profile looks a lot like a sales lead profile. They are, after all, two sides of the same coin, more or less. This is the list of associates. We call them associates as opposed to employees because associates doesn't have any baggage as a term, whereas it could be employees, might imply 40 hours a week, or contractors. So associates was a fairly neutral term that we could use. All right, and we have pay levels indicated down here. You can define your own pay levels. You don't have to use exactly the ones that we are listing here by default. SMMware comes with a lot of defaults, but then you can modify them from there. We have a simpler approach to pay levels. We have a fancier approach. The simple approach can distinguish between somebody who's working as a regular team member versus whoever the team lead is for a job. And it can also distinguish between working on the weekends and the weekdays. So this is a team lead on a weekday. This is a team lead on the weekend. And then the other thing we can do is tie the pay levels to the job codes that we mentioned before. So then you can get really fancy where you say, all right, somebody does floor planning, and that's kind of a specialized thing. So you can have a floor planning pay level, and when they go to enter their hours and they pick the floor planning job code, then it will match them up to the floor planning pay level. And if you had more than one person doing floor planning, they could each have their own rate. So it's very customizable. Down here below, this is, we're going to talk about permissions now, and this ties back to Brianna's question, I think. So you can have a normal user, team leads, admins, senior admins, and company owners. This is a master switch, so to speak. These are all granular permissions that address specific areas within the program. And if you're in a part of the program that is not addressed by one of these granular permissions, the system falls back to this overall setting, this master setting. And these permissions, here's the one about sales role. They can have no permissions, read, write. SMMware has, here's the HR permissions, where if you have HR permissions, then you can see people's pay levels. You can add new records and edit records, things like that. This is for scheduling. We have a homepage calendar where everybody can see it for their own copy. But then we have a master calendar that shows everything going on across the entire company. And then that one is affected by this setting. So you can have no access, read, write access. And the main takeaway here is that we have a fair number of permissions that allow you to fine tune who can see what within the program. This is called a skill code. And the intention here is that you would have a very abbreviated code that you can define it yourself in the settings editor. This would stand for packing, P for packing, sorting, organizing, and it's going to be used when you go to create events so that you can match up an employee's skills with the event that you're assigning them to. Also, the workers do not see what their ratings are under the skill code, so you don't have to worry about arguing about whether somebody's perfect at every single category. Down below that, we have some HR functionality. You can upload files. And when I say files, I just want to, even though I uploaded images, you can also upload Word docs and PDFs and Excel files. So it is a file manager as opposed to an image manager. You can create tasks. You can write notes. And you can set up events. And if it's an HR, if it's tagged for HR, like under the HR files, then you have to have HR permissions to see it. All right, so moving on, I'm going to talk about what it's like to enter your hours. I can manage hours on behalf of someone other than myself because I'm a higher level user. So your front-end office manager might have that permission if you want them to. Most likely they would. So they can make corrections when people make errors. This is where you can create a new entry. And you're going to say which date the work was done on, which job it was done for. And when I type that in, the system is going to do a little interpreting. So 9:00 becomes 9 a.m. So you don't necessarily have to use the drop downs and pick from them. You can start typing and let SMMware interpret that. We can mark this as being billable or not. We want to put in a description. I can type something out, or I can pick from one of these items in this list. And like so many of these other lists I've mentioned, this one is customizable. SMMware also supports an approach for charging clients and paying employees based on travel by distance. And so I could put in here that there was 100 miles involved. The system has a setting that says the first 30 miles are free, so they don't have to pay the employee for that or charge the client. But then after that, every mile is at a certain rate, like say 60 cents per mile. And these are separate settings, so you can have one rate for charging the client versus the rate that the employees are paid. Again, this is where you add new entries. If I worked one place in the morning and another place in the afternoon, I would I'd use the add new row button just to create another entry so I can take care of them both in one go. I don't have to do one entry and then circle around and repeat. Down below that, we have, for Janelle, this is being recorded and it will be posted to our corporate website under the webinars and training page, either probably by the end of the day tomorrow, if not sooner. Going back to the screen here, we have the listing of existing entries. They drop off as the jobs are closed out. They're editable until they're part of an invoice. We have an approval system that is optional where you can have the hourly and expense items approved before they can appear on an invoice. This is the approach where somebody does the work and then at the end of the work, they enter their time. So in this case, probably at 3 o'clock when I'm leaving the site, I would go in and create this entry. We alternatively offer the approach of using a time clock where you walk onto the site and then you click the start button. And then when you're leaving, you click the stop button. SMMware also lets you set how much rounding you want to do. So you can have 1 minute, 3 minute, 15-minute interval of rounding, because most people honestly charge clients by the 15-minute intervals. I really haven't seen very popular to charge people by smaller amounts, 3 or 1 minute, but you can. Moving on, we've got the recording of expenses. It's a very similar approach to the entry of hours. I put in a date and pick the job. In this case, I have to put in how much money was spent and which vendor it was spent with. We can mark it as billable or not. I can take a photo of the receipt and upload it. So this would be when you're on your phone. The radio buttons here refer to not whether the client is going to pay your company back, but this is about whether the employee paid out of pocket and then they need to be reimbursed, as opposed to having a company credit card, so then they don't. We have a separate list of predefined terms that you can pick from. And once again, you have your existing or your new entries going here and your existing entries appearing in a list down below. And going back to the question of invoices, I'm going to jump over to the admin menu and the invoice manager. This is a listing of invoices. Within SMMware, the idea is that you may sometimes be on a long project and you're charging by the month. So we do have you enter a start date and end date. And then SMMware will pull in the items for that time range, and you can charge people for this month, and then the next month you charge them for that month, and so on. We have some status levels. This is preliminary, which means it's your way of telling other people in the company that you are not done and they shouldn't be sending it to the clients. We have an optional feature for having team leads approve the work. So the team leads were the ones who are on site. They know which employees were there and what work was done. So they would be in a good position to approve things if you want. Again, that's optional. But this term here, team TL approved, really means team lead approved. And this is the web version looking at the invoice. It's got the total down here. But just like the quotes, you can create PDFs. SMMware offers you 3 different PDF formats, and you can pick any one of those formats at any time. This is the summary version. It doesn't break the invoice down into dates. You won't see any dates here. And it just has the high-level labor expenses and fees and adjustments, but nothing day by day. And that one might be appropriate. You might have some clients that tend to argue with you a lot with the more detail they see. So maybe you want to use the summary version. Before I forget, you can also email these. You can email the PDF as an attachment, just like you could with the quotes. So here's the detailed version. For Lisa, we do have an integration with QuickBooks, both QuickBooks Online and QuickBooks Desktop. I'm going to finish talking about the PDF, and then I'll circle back to that question a little bit more. You can see what the invoice PDF looks like. And again, this header image will be replaced with one for you. Touching on the QuickBooks integration, this little dot right here, it's green and says QB, and it indicates that this invoice has already been copied to QuickBooks. Generally speaking, I would describe the flow of information when we integrate with QuickBooks as mostly being from, on a day-to-day basis, is from SMMware into QuickBooks. So when you first set up the integration, you can integrate from QuickBooks. You can import all your clients and your vendors and your employees if you so desire. But for instance, when you're copying a client over, then you run into issues about the differences in names, Deborah versus Debbie, and so on. So if we try to have information go back and forth both ways, you run into the issue of mismatches in names, and then you wind up with duplicate records. So if you're going to use the integration, we would strongly encourage you to create all those records in SMMware first and let SMMware copy them over. If this had not been copied to QuickBooks already, there would be a button here that says QBO add, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It adds this invoice to QuickBooks. So circling back to our formats for PDFs, this is called a roll-up, and it will take a long, detailed invoice which has multiple entries per day. Let's say you have a day where there's 5 employees on site. That gets rolled up into one line item, and it says 5 employees, this many hours total, and here's your subtotal. and it creates a shorter invoice. Sometimes you need to send the invoice to where they're moving from. Sometimes you need to send it where they're moving to. And you can pick those addresses from here, and SMMware will fill them out for you so that it appears on the invoice as you like. And that more or less brings us to the end of our first segment, the one in blue. We talked about clients. We talked about sales leads and job records, talked about quotes. We talked about entering your hours and expenses and creating invoices. And I also touched on uploading files. Next, we're going to look at our resource center, which is organizations and contacts. You find it here on the menu under resources. Organizations are the companies, and the contacts are the people who work at those companies. And this listing is divided up into categories. You assign the categories when you create the records. There are 3 different kinds of records that you find here. We didn't call it a vendor list because in addition to the people that you spend money with, your traditional vendors, you also have people here that you might recommend. So somebody asks you who's a good cleaner, and you can come to this under home improvements, and these category names are also customizable. And so we say, all right, well, Wally Cleaners does a great job. You can get their information and pass that along to the client. So that's the second kind of record, people that you recommend. Even if you don't personally spend money with them, they're not a traditional vendor. And the third kind of record that might appear here is people who send business to you. And in the case of move managers, that would be maybe like a senior living center. It could be real estate. And so that's the third kind of record that you would find here. We're looking at an organization's records. And I'd like to point out that you can upload files. So for instance, let's say you're working with a moving company and they give you a certificate of insurance. You can scan that and store that in SMMware. This resource center is a centralized location where everybody in the company can go to get this kind of information at their fingertips, as it were. You can also create tasks for this organization. So let's say that the certificate of insurance runs out every year and you create a task telling you, hey, it's time to get the new one from the moving company. You can write notes. So that way, if you had a good experience with them, a bad experience with them, you can note that for the long-term records. You can also assign organizations to the jobs. I've mentioned that as part of the sales lead process, which carries over into the jobs. So on a given job, you can say, we're working with this real estate company, with this moving company, or whatever. And when you go to look at the records for that organization, it'll tell you how many jobs they've been assigned to. So you can see how much you've recommended to that particular vendor. This is a contact, and there would just be a vertical list of contacts for that vendor here. I can go to edit them. I can create a new one. Let's go take a look at them. And this is pretty much what you would expect for a contact record, their name and their phone and so on. So people ask me what this field is, about the favorites. And if you like to give people small gifts at the holidays, then this is a place where you can take note of that and let SMMware remember for you. And this is an important field right here. It marks that this person refers business to you. That information in conjunction with the date of last contact is going to drive some other functionality in SMMware. You can also upload files, create tasks, and write notes here as well for the contacts if you like. Jump back to their organization. This is where you mark them as being a vendor or not, which allows them to appear on the list of vendors. Since this list overall includes people who are not traditional vendors, you don't want all of them appearing on your list of vendors when you're creating an expense. All right, so that's the shortest leg of our tour, I would say. We're moving on to talk about tasks, notes, calls, and calendars. I'm going to jump back over to a job. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and look at the tasks section. This is the list of tasks for this particular job. And I can update the various information on the fly from here, or I can open up the full record in order to make some changes. When you create a task within SMMware, there is a primary assignee, and there can also be secondary assignees. Rather than having a single list of everybody being assigned to a task, we break it up like this because if everybody's assigned to the task, it's kind of like everybody's in charge, so nobody's in charge. This way, it's clear that this person is responsible for this task, and these other people, they are involved, and they can take over if this person's out sick or something like that. But the person in charge is clearly noted. After you've worked with the system for a while, you'll realize, hey, I'm creating the same kinds of tasks at different stages of the project. I've got 5 tasks during the pre-move. I've got 5 tasks on move day. I've got 5 tasks to wrap up the job once it's winding down. And we offer something called a task group that lets you handle multiple tasks at once. So these buttons are defined in the settings editor, and each one of these buttons has a set of tasks underneath it. So when I go to pre-sale consultation, I can see that there's 1, 2, 3 tasks involved. I can also see that a lot of the values are pre-assigned. If I don't need one of the tasks in this case, I just click on the X and get rid of it. Now I have 1, 2 tasks left. And let's see, before we move on, the next thing we talk about are notes. A note is simpler than a task. It is simply a summary and the actual detailed description if you want to. But the system will tell you who created the note and when they created it. And lower level users are not able to modify each other's notes, so you can have confidence that when it says that this person wrote this, you can be sure that that was them who did it. Next, we're going to talk about the idea of logging that a call has come in or planning for a future call. I'll point out that if the date is in the past, it's red, so it's to remind you that this is behind for some reason. Go ahead and create a new call. You can see that in this case, in the case of a call, you might be working with somebody who called you just now, and the date is going to be today. Or you can be using this to plan a future call, so that the call date will be in the future, which makes it more important to put down the phone number and whether you are calling them or they are calling you. Once again, we have the idea of a primary assignee. We have secondary assignees. And also we can modify various columns just by clicking on them. From here, I'm going to jump to the home page. And we're going to continue to look at the task notes along the way, but we have some other functions to discuss as well. And the first one is called the status board for jobs. When you create a job, you can pick a tag and you can enter some text that kind of sums up how the project is going. These tags are, this is what you would get by default, but you can modify these tags within the settings editor. So right now we have alert, flag, and good. If this was all green and you're looking at it at the end of the day, then you can go home and sleep soundly. If you have a few in yellow, maybe you have to do something the next day. If there are some in red, perhaps they should be addressed before you can call it a night. But we can modify the tags from here. We can modify the text of the note. And going back to Brianna's question about what the Office admins see as a higher level user, you would be able to see the status board. As a low level user, you would not. This is the sales status board, and it serves the same idea. So this is the 30,000 foot view of how things are going for your company when it comes to sales. And again, the tags can be modified. You don't have to work with exactly what we're using here. And you have to have sales permissions in order to view the sales status board. Here we have the task center. By default, when it comes up, it's going to show me the tasks that are assigned to me, so-called my tasks. I will also be able to see secondary tasks where I am assigned to it, but in a secondary role, so I don't have as much responsibility and I won't pay quite as much attention to it as a secondary task. If I created a task and assigned it to someone else, that is delegation, and I can see a list of all the tasks that I've delegated to other people, make sure they're keeping up with them. If I am a higher level user, then I can see the unfinished tasks across the entire company. And I also be able to see recently finished tasks. They drop off of this list after 5 days. So that's what is meant by recent. We have a similar functionality, the call center. My calls, secondaries, delegated, unfinished, recently finished. I mentioned before that there's an optional approval system for the hours and expenses. And if you have that activated, then you'll have this section. And if you are a team lead, you're the team lead for a particular job, somebody's made some hourly entries, they would appear here. I can go view them and approve them or not. I can reject them. And if I am the employee whose hourly entry got rejected, then it would appear here. I could go edit it, resubmit it to the system, and it would bounce back and forth between these two sections, the employee looking at it here, the team lead looking at it here, until they agree on exactly how it should read. Next, we have a section called My Teams as Team Lead, and we separate that from the My Teams as Team Member because you're going to pay more attention to the ones where you are the team lead than to the ones where you're just the member. When we're looking at the context, I talked about the idea of somebody sending business to you. We have this section for the ones that are most stale, where stale means it's been the longest since you've spoken to them. So for this section, SMMware looks at your overall system. It looks at the contacts who are sending business to you. It looks at the date of last contact, and it gives you a list of 10 where it's been the longest since you've spoken to them. So you've got your phone number and your email address. You can get in touch with them. You can update the date of last contact, and you work your way through this list. And in your ideal world, all of these dates are pretty recent, and then you know that you're in touch with people, because what you don't want to do is lose touch with people who are sending you business. So now we're going to move into the calendaring, and SMMware comes with an approach for managing the attendees through invitations. And if I had any open invitations, they would appear here, and I could request being part of that event or not, or I can tell them I can't be part of the event here. Below that, I've got my schedule, and it's exactly what it sounds like. This is only going to show me events where I am an attendee, or at least the main contact. And everybody has a my schedule, but not everybody has access to the main master calendar. If I do, then this link appears on the main menu. And then now I can see the master calendar. SMMware uses tags and colors so that you can look at the calendar and tell something about an event just from the color. And you can customize these tags. We give you 24 of them or so, and you can assign different labels and colors. And there's 3 basic approaches that I've seen used for these tags. The simplest approach is to distinguish between a job and a sales event. And the next approach is to distinguish between the kinds of work being done. This is a packing day. This is an unpacking day. Or you might want to distinguish who's in charge. So this dark blue is Margot in charge. This darker brown is Carmen. You'll notice that this event right here is got a thin red outline around it, which marks it as being tentative. There's a note to remind you of that right there. When we go to create an event, then we'll see that as well, where you can set that. And you can filter the output here. You can turn off certain tags and only see some of them if that's what you'd like to do. Okay, and when we click on one of these events, we get our pop-up, and we can see more details. We can see the employees who are attending the event and when they're going to be there. We can jump over to the job profile or see a printable version of this. Before I forget, when we open this up, there could be a link here for the mapping function. I click on that and it opens up GPS mapping. And this is going to give you your turn-by-turn directions to get to the location. So we are essentially handing you over to your system's default mapping function. So for Brianna, so in SMMware's vocabulary, these are events on the calendar, and we're going to create a new event and show you how to assign the employees to them. So I'm starting a new event. I'm going to say that this event is for a job as opposed to like a sales event. And once you tell SMMware that you're doing this for a job, you're creating this for a job, then naturally SMMware wants to know which job. You'll notice this text was already here. In the settings editor, you are essentially saying, this is the kind of information that I'm looking for you to collect when you create one of these, but you do not have to stick with it. You can get rid of the text that you don't need this time around. This particular one, I'm going to switch to one that maybe has 2 addresses involved. There we go. There's one. So this is an icon of a house with an arrow pointing out. Here's an arrow pointing into a house. Naturally, that refers to their current address and the address that they're moving out of. When we save this and go back to the main view, this gets turned into the link that you can follow to the map. Also, I would like to point out that your total hours entered into the system will show here. If you created a sales lead which has hours in it, the system will also tell you that maybe you sold this for 300 hours and there's 50 hours left. But you do have to create a sales lead and put hours into it in order for the information to appear for that part of it. This is where you can mark the event as being tentative. Sometimes you make a small change to an event and you don't want to bother everybody with notifications, so SMMware allows you to skip that. Sometimes you have an office manager who handles all the scheduling and you want them to handle the questions about those events, and this is where you would indicate that. So this person's going to appear on the notifications. Here is Marion's phone number and email address in case there's questions. We have a team lead that handles the job as a whole, but if you're visiting the client's home multiple times, you might have somebody in charge for one day, somebody else in charge for another day, and that is the event lead. And we can pick an event lead here if it's applicable. You can set some reminders. SMMware can send out notifications via email, and it can send them out via text messages. And now we get to Brianna's question. SMMware has 3 different ways for how you manage the employees who are going to attend an event. And each one of them has its own underlying way of thinking and assumptions. So this is the direct approach. And the thinking here is that you had a company meeting or you're driving back from an event, from a job, and you already agreed on who's going to do the work for this next event. So you simply need to formalize it and get into the system. So when I pick someone from this, they're going to get a notification saying you are assigned, as opposed to any kind of invitation, do yes or no. You're just assigned, because the assumption for this approach is that it's already been agreed to. The next approach we have is the invite-based approach, and we're going to say how big the team is. And we pick there's multiple ways you can use this particular functionality. You can pick 5 people, even though you only need 3. Maybe one of them can't do it, so they respond with a no. But now you've got 4 people who would like to do the work. So there's a final step where you can assign them, and then they get their notifications. 3 of them say, you are now part of this team. And the 4th person who was not picked gets a notification saying, I'm sorry, you're not part of this team. Another approach for invites is first come, first serve. So you invite everybody in the company. And then the first 3 that respond with a yes, they get a message saying your request is recorded into the system. And then anybody after that, it says, I'm sorry, the team is full. And another approach is to use multiple rounds of invitations. In the chat, I'd be curious for people to sound off on which of the approaches that we're going to be using might be most applicable to you. But you might want to wait until I explain the last one, which is availability. To finish up with invites, right now I'm talking about multiple rounds of invitations. So I need 3 people. I invite the 3 people who I would really like to do this work. But then one of them can't make it. So I come back and I add another person. And then I wait for them to respond. Hopefully the team is full. But then, hopefully the team is full. But if not, you can even add more people. For Janelle, that is the perfect question for where we're going next. Well, going back to invites, you would set the start time and the end time here. And for the first two approaches that we're talking about, it's essentially client-driven, where you first talk to the client about when they want the work to be done, and then you assign people to it. And those first two approaches also assume that everybody is arriving at the same time and leaving at the same time. But our third approach is availability. And here we have what it looks like for the availability approach. But before I go down and look at that in detail, this is what the employees would do. They would go to associates and my availability, and they would go through the different weeks and say, oh, I can't work Tuesday morning on that day. I can't work Friday afternoon on that day. So this is employee driven because they have to do this before you're creating the event. When you go to create the event, you can come down to the bottom. You'll see a timeline across the top from morning till evening. You'll see the list of employees down the left. And here's where you can start assigning shifts, and you can say, all right, this person's going to work in this time range. This person's going to work in that time range. So maybe a typical scenario is one person arrives and watches the moving company unload boxes, and then everybody else arrives to do all the unpacking. So this is our fancier approach where you can have different start times and end times for different people. Anne, thank you for your input on how you use it, or how you use scheduling. Another feature we offer is when we're looking at the employee profiles, I talked about skill codes, and then this is where that skill code would show up. And this way I can take into account people's different skills as I assign them to events. If I forgot exactly what I meant, because this is an abbreviation, so it's not, we don't want something that's going to take up a whole paragraph. We want something that's very short. We give you this button where you can remind yourself what your skill codes definitions were. And we also offer you a planning tool called the availability table. In this case, we have days of the week across the top going out for 12 weeks. And we have employees down the left. If the entry is for an actual event, it'll have a highlighted color in the background, and it will have the name for the client. If it represents free time, then it'll have no background color. So you can use this as a planning tool. If somebody is designated as qualified to be an event lead, their name will be in red. Also, I can click on the name to bump it up to the top. So if you have a bunch of employees and the ones you want to use are scattered throughout the list, you can click on them, bump them up to the top, and see the entire team and kind of visually double check it before you go forward with actually setting something up. So I'm going to go ahead and skip notifications, save this event. So hopefully, Brianna, that answers your questions regarding how people are assigned to an event. And now that they're assigned, you sometimes have people that need to get off the event, maybe they have a doctor's appointment. So I would release them. Releasing means that they cannot be part of another company event. If you're going to the doctor, you can't work on this event, but you can't work on any other one either because you're not available. On the other hand, if something changed by the clients, they lost the key to the storage room, and so now you can't do any work in there, you don't need as many people, I can click on this a second time and go back to being fully available. So even though Carmen's not going to be on this particular event now, she would be available to work on some other event. So that is a pretty good introduction to our scheduling. And I have a few comments about integrations, and then we'll start wrapping things up. And if there happen to be any questions, be happy to take those. Integrations, we touched on QuickBooks. Like I said, we do QuickBooks Online and QuickBooks Desktop as well. And you can copy over hours and expenses. Let's see, we'll go back for a couple months here. And here's the QBO add button that says this has not already been copied to QuickBooks. SMMware is smart enough to copy over any necessary like parent records. So before I can copy over hours against a job, SMMware has to make sure that the employee has already been copied over, has to make sure that the client's already been copied over. So SMMware will take care of that kind of housekeeping for you when you're trying to copy over the hours. We also integrate with MailChimp, which is a mass mailing tool, if you're not familiar with it. And we copy over clients, we copy over the contacts and employees, and we assign tags to them. A client tag might be current client or past client. The contacts tagging would represent the category they're under for the resource, under the resource listing. We also integrate with something called Zapier, which is kind of a middleware. So since SMMware cannot learn to talk directly to every software package that's out there, then by involving Zapier, we can talk to a lot more software packages. So SMMware talks to Zapier and says, hey, there's a new client. And then Zapier will tell this other software, here's the name, here's the email address, and so on. So you would have an account with Zapier, and you would set up these integrations both with SMMware and with this other software. And then the information could flow from SMMware to this other software or the other way around. And we also integrate with Google Calendar. What that means is that you would have a single calendar over at Google as kind of the company calendar. SMMware would copy everything on the company calendar to that, and then you can share that amongst the employees based on the rules provided by Google Calendar. I'm going to touch on how you can learn about SMMware now. There's in-app help. When you're looking at the calendar and you click on help, it's going to give you help about the calendar. You can go to our website and you can see manuals both for the admins, the team leads, and the team members. You can download PDFs of that. You can also go to, on our homepage, it lists our YouTube channel. And we have, and I can just go directly to there. So it's simply youtube.com/SMMware will take you to that channel. And here we have 30 videos. Some of them are high level and last a while. Some of them are shorter and focus on particular topics. So if you look at the videos, you might have 5 minutes about e-signing. You might have an overview of the sales features for 10 minutes, and so on. And in addition to the YouTubes, the other way you can learn about SMMware is through direct training. And we have an accredited trainer. Her name is Liz Donovan. She is separate from SMMware, but we worked with her to make sure that she was qualified back at the beginning when we first started working together, which she very much was and has gotten even better over time. And we've always gotten great feedback about Liz. But her information is here, and you can work with her to customize all the different lists that I talked about. As I was going through the software, I was saying you can customize this list, you can customize that list, and she'll tell you where to go in the software to make those customizations, but she also has advice about what might be the best choices. It's great to know where to go to make those changes, but it's even better to have advice about what works well for everything that she's seeing working with all the different clients. If someone was to get to the point of being ready to work with SMMware, you would have a 30-day free trial. So you can go to our pricing and sign up page. You'll see here that you get the 30-day free trial. Our usage levels are based on how many users you have. And it starts off at $45 a month for 10 users, but it goes up very modestly from there to add 10 more users or 20 more users and so on. All right, so that wraps up our tour. I'll stick around if anybody has any questions. And Anna, thank you for your endorsement of Liz. This much appreciated. If anybody has any questions, as I said, I'll stick around. But otherwise, I thank you for joining me here today and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Okay, bye now.